So I'm Gabriel, and today I'm going to enlighten how to secure your source code management. So you all manage your code in Git, can be GitHub, can GitLab, can be VCS. And since this shifting left, we need to be very secure in how we configuring our source control. So I'm like 10 years in development, as I said last year in JIT. And who is ready here to see some magic? Let's do magics. So I need someone from the audience with a GitHub account. Now I have two things. First, I prefer it will not be the GitHub account that you use in your work. And the second, I need a picture there. Anyone? No one. So I'll do it with someone else. You don't know that he's been on this stage today. But you know Kelsey Hightower? Yeah, he's a very famous guy in the cloud native world. And now let's do something that he don't know that we are doing. But first I need him to be in my, maybe I already, okay, I do have it here. Okay. So I have here a GitHub repository called Warsaw factory, and now I run some command, and you'll see a magic. It's not me turning the light. Could you turn the light, please? Okay, so now I'm running this command, and I'm going to GitHub. And what we'll see now on GitHub, I'll refresh that page. So somehow the internet is very slow today. And I don't want to tell you what the magic will be, so let's give it some time. Slow / not working. Anyway, whenever I go back to GitHub, we'll see that I pushed a commit, a malicious commit, to my public Git repository in the name of Kelsey Hightower. And that thing, if you think about it, that's crazy. I mean, sometime it will work, but for now you will have to believe me. Okay. That thing is crazy. Think about it, that we have today tons of code that we're taking from open source, right? So we need something, we're first going to GitHub to find that. If we need something that help us, some script, we're going to find that. And anyone can, in your identity, push thing to GitHub. And now, when I'm doing it, there is some configuration to hide it. But let me tell you, GitHub, by default, are allowing everyone to push commits in your name, and no one can track that. So a couple of months ago, I woke up in the morning to see that tweet. As you see, that was a very popular tweet, like 20K likes and a lot of retweets. This tweet report about 35K repositories that send all the password in the environment variable into some Russian malicious website. Now, after a couple of hours, GitHub released a message that said, that's not true. But it's not true in the facts, but the true is that there is some attack, a very sophisticated attack here. Okay, so how that Git phishing attack work? So let's see what happened there. Some attacker find a very old repository, open source repositories, or trying to clone a very famous repository. So let's say there is a repository called Kubernetes/Kubernetes. This attacker create organization, call it Kubernetes IO/Kubernetes. He cloned the Kubernetes to there, and then he push commit in name of one of the famous maintainer of Kubernetes with that's malicious code. Now let's say that I need a version of Kubernetes or something that I want to build alone, or just if it's something that I use it raw as code, I'm searching that on Google and I can mistakenly get into that repository, clone it to my environment, and that will be bad if even I run it locally, but sometimes I even can push it into my cloud environment and send everything sensitive into that attacker servers. And again, GitHub by default not enabling the configuration that not allowing it. We still don't have Kelsey here, but you can come after and see that. Or just visit this repository. Everything fine with the screen? Gosh. Oh, great. But that's not work, actually. Why it could continue to work? I'll do it in this one because I know this work here. Okay. So it's back offline. Okay, another famous attack that we have a couple of years ago. So somebody know Codecov here? Codecov is actually a tool that checking how much coverage you have to your test. So someone somehow getting into Codecov CI/CD infrastructure and put some code there that, again, push every password or credentials that Codecov user has into the cloud, into some malicious server. And that's actually happened the same. People took Codecov, took that into their pipelines, but they are not protected the pipeline. They're not protected the build. And again, if you're using GitHub Actions, if you're using Circle CI, in the default configuration, your build workers can get anywhere in the cloud. They are not closed. So again, there are many, many configurations in our source code management that we should start to take care for. But knowing the problem is just halfway to solution. So the CIS actually published a playbook or a guide about supply chain security. The first 2 chapters there is actually about SCM configuration. We'll now start to move on the areas when we need to start to protect ourselves. So the first thing to do is to be aware, are we protecting code changes? What can go bad in code changes? So the first one is what we see. We need to be sure that we are signing every commit. So that's the configuration on GitHub to require our repository that each commit will be signed in a GPG key. If I was enforce my repository to be signed for each commit, GitHub wasn't able to me to push these commits. And also we should enforce our user to sign their commits. There are a lot of things we need to do there. For example, we need to branch our main, to protect our main branch. We are in JIT, we are checking for user if they are protecting the main branch, and we don't have even one user that all their repositories, the main was protected. So they create the test, they create the step of merging builds to main, but the main is actually not protecting. Old branches, we have a lot of old branches in code, but if it takes a time, it can be malicious. Code that we don't know about and then we push it can have conflicts. And that's so on. We need to be thinking on the code change, that every code change that push into the master, we know all the corners when it can go bad. And another thing is the repository management. Everyone here in the room can be sure that a user in their organization cannot just open repositories and do whatever you do with that. And that even internally can be a really security issue. We need to inspect every repository created. And when we manage this repository, we also need to check that we inspect deletion of issues, deletion of branches. That thing can be very bad. We also want to monitor the fork of our repository. Every fork of our repository can be used for a malicious purpose. And then we should look on the contribution access. Who can contribute? Even we protect our code changes. Who can try to contribute? How we know that everyone that contributes to our organization is someone that willing to have access to that? Do our users are protected with MFA? Do their action protect them with MFA? Password is something that's very easy to find. Just a week ago, Researchers find that with GPUs, you can detect 8 characters password in 48 minutes. We need to enable MFA on our users. And then the last thing, when we commit our change, when we deploy our production, do we aware about code risk? Code today can have a lot of risk, can have a risk in the code itself, but can also have a risk in infrastructure as code. And as we know, all the third-party applications that we have in our pipeline, that we have in our code, we can be sure that is protected. And after we know that every code push is protected, we should start to take a look on our pipeline. So today, the pipeline, the CI, is part of the source control. It's configured together with the source control. If you're using, for example, GitHub Action, you need to know that this integration is something that cannot be decoupled. So we know that our build environment is always clean. We know that our pipeline has single responsibility, that user cannot just, put something there just to check and then leave it there, and that can be malicious. Do you know that our configuration for pipelines are automated and not loose everywhere? Also, we have the workers, so we have builders, right? So it can be Ubuntu image, it can be whatever Docker you use to build your image. Are we protect them? Are we doing security scanning on those images that build our software? We can make sure that we control the network connectivity. So if CodeCov was some kind of ingress firewall on their build containers, they can be sure that no one can send this credential out. This is something that we should add to our build workers. And the last thing, we need to make sure about the instructions of our pipelines. Our pipelines are very, very sensitive. Everyone can go in the middle and do something. So for example, are we restricting access for building that? Do we do some scanning configuration on that? And so on and so forth. So just asking from you, just be aware for your SCM and your source code management configuration to be secure. But don't be afraid, it's not too much. I know that I look like a cybersecurity researcher who come to afraid you. That's not that hard. There are many tools today. Just take an action, go back to work and start to work with one of those tools. So how can we protect our source control configuration? I'll go today only with open source tool. There are many commercial, but I don't want to sell you something. There is a source control tool that called Chainbench, is developed by Aqua Security, and they are actually take a lot of the tests that we already discussed about them today and implement it automatically. So if you use their container, you can see here, hopefully after the GIF will continue to run, that they are running all those tests and showing you what failed. I can tell you again that I don't see even one user that ran Chainbench and got the score of 100 of 100. So that's really important. Just try it in your repository. That's work today only on GitHub. And I must say that GitLab much secured today than GitHub. So I don't want you to use GitLab because we are supporting only GitHub. But if you can use GitLab, that is better. Another thing is that Step Security. Step Security is another open source set of tools that take care for your pipelines. So Step Security is something that you can install in GitHub Action or in a Circus CI or in GitLab. And they are actually have like a ingress firewall on your workers. So you can, you run once your pipeline. You see where Step Security failed to get internet access, outbound internet access, and then you can restrict your runs only to this one. So if someone trying to send some sensitive data from your build environment, they will not succeed to do that. Another thing to do is your approach. So if you're using monorepo, that's one thing, but usually we have multiple repo. Why don't us just centralize the CI workflows? Why don't us, so the way we are creating it, we have one central CI repository where we are keeping all our pipeline configuration. Okay, and then when someone open a code repository and trying to implement our pipeline, the only way he has to, he can do that is configure it through the center CI repository. So a user open PR in our repository, and we have like a backend service that choosing the right CI to implement on this repository. So in this way, you can be sure that everything related to your configuration in the CI is secured. But now we can go even a step forward. So there is actually a new, it's not so new, but we're using it like 6 months. There is Terraform GitHub provider. So instead of just having your GitHub configuration with checkbox going in the UI, check that, check here, you can do better. You can write all your Git configuration as a code. That's also going in the approach of everything as code. And the benefit of that is that you can have a real least privilege model. So the only one who can create repository, the only one who can configure repository is actually your service account that running the infrastructure as code that enabling your GitHub organization. So as you can see here, this Terraform provider support everything, support repository, support the setting, support the users that created on your organization. You can even check that you create the user, that you only invite the user and not let a new user come in. So I'm wishing you good luck in securing your SCM. I hope you're not fear too much because not that afraid. And I really want to ask you, we on JIT are very, very appropriate DevOps opinion on our product. To appropriate your time, we give a small gift for 30 minutes of your time just to me to show you the product. That's a free product, so that's not a sale call. And hear what you think on us. So if you want, you can just join here or just come here. You can set some a Zoom call. Thank you very much.